What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse, from the Conversation, the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next two guests. One I am so familiar with, and the one I'm going to have the pleasure to get to know through this experience right now. But these two individuals are dynamic. They have brought together something completely special, so unique, and it's so George 2.0. It just literally is George 2.0. And so let's just get to it. I have with me two special guests, Miss Lauren Grant. How are you, Lauren?
I'm good. It is technically Grove now. Much to the world. The world is still getting used to it, but I'm Grove now.
Sorry. All right. So Lauren Grove. And how long have you been Grove?
I've been Grove a year and a half.
Oh.
So compared to being Grant a really long time, it takes a second. So
well, we want to make sure we get you right, Lauren Grant Grove. The Mrs. Lauren Grant Grove, Mrs. Grove, yes. Mrs. Grove. But you look great. You feeling good?
Thank you. I'm feeling great. We're excited. We got a big week coming up.
Well, that is so great. And then Mr. George 2.0. What is happening, Cap?
We come with our own sound effects.
That was amazing.
Mike, what's going on, man? It's great to see you. And I honestly, I really appreciate you already. I know we're going to have a detailed conversation, but already feeling the spirit of what we're putting together. But in the interest of partnership, particularly shout out to Jason Grove, who I had the pleasure of meeting while we were producing this event. And that's the kind of thing that we really embody in terms of bringing family into this event, is that everybody's hands get involved. So I appreciate the Grove part of Lauren Grant Grove, because it's actually helped us to produce this event.
Come on now.
Shout out to Mr. Grove.
Shout out to
we just wanted to say Mr. Grove hello, and I'm sorry to disrespect your marriage by not acknowledging you,
good.
But we are here, Mr. Grove. But what's been so great, audience, is that and Lauren, I'm going to include you in this conversation, but I can just have a moment with George here. Audience, it's so funny how life works, particularly here in New York City and the media entertainment. The world is so small. Yeah. I had the pleasure of meeting George 2.0 when he probably had just moved to New York City. I think I had relatively moved to New York City, and we were doing a special. I was talking and running my mouth about something, as I'm always doing. And George, being the multi-hyphenate savant that he is, before there was a multi-hyphenate savant, he was doing the video recording.
I was.
And so that's how we first met and how we got introduced to media. And George, never in my wildest dreams would I imagine that I would have the Mike Muse Show here at SiriusXM. You would be on my show, Mike SiriusXM, and that I would bump into you at the Grammys, the Oscars.
Everywhere. We've seen each other on both sides of the stages everywhere.
Literally. And ladies and gentlemen, I had the chance to be in his apartment when he lived in Harlem for the ugly sweater party. So I've seen the evolution of George 2.0, seen his family grow, his beautiful child. I mean, it's been amazing. It's a really special treat. So Lauren, when I say these things, that this is a family and this is special, it truly is. And to hear, Lauren, that you're married now, and
well, George and I are also family. That's important to know. We are cousins.
Is that absolutely wild? And to be specific, we are cousins by choice. So, so Lauren and my wife Jovian are cousins, and it was just one of those kind of serendipitous things where we were finding ourselves around each other all the time in unofficial ways, that we figured out, you know what, we can probably do some business together. You know, we could probably work together. And you know, it's not always good working with your family, but Mike, as you so clearly explained, we've been family for a long time, and we found ways to work and to play. And make it look like work, and to work and make it look like play. And that's the same kind of energy that we're continuing here.
And I think it's amazing. So audience, you just never know where life's going to take you. I think the lesson I want to impart with you on this beautiful day is just to be kind and just to be decent. I always tell you, audience, that nothing is ever perfect. You know, I'm never a perfect person, but I always strive to be kind and decent, because you just never know where life takes you. And Lauren, I had the privilege of being into any room, no matter where I'm in, and being comfortable, knowing I've never done harm to anyone that I'm walking into. And it gives me this peace And I can only imagine the peace that people have when they come into HBCU SpringComing. You guys are taking this show on the road. It started here in New York City. I know you guys are both proud HBCU alums. George and Morehouse, man, and Lauren, fam, you, fam, damn you. All right. And so
come on now,
come on now into it, and bringing the Greek life. My new brother, Chi Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Delta Sigma Theta is in the house. Talk to me, Lauren, about the inception. Were you sitting in George's apartment in Harlem before they became bi-coastal? And you guys like, you know what? We should do a SpringComing and bring all the HBCUs together.
This is almost the story. Instead of George's apartment, we're in my apartment, literally, after church at First Corinthians Baptist Church. Shout out to Pastor Mike.
Amen.
And we literally, George and I were talking about how we as individual alums go back pretty much every year for homecoming. That's just kind of our thing. But if you went to school in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, it's a little hard to get to homecoming from New York City. And so we thought, what if we just created a homecoming in New York? And so we didn't want to interfere with the fall schedule. Now, keep in mind, this is literally a conversation after brunch, right? So we're thinking this is it'd be good. We got 150, 200 people out there. Call our friends. Maybe we do a little something in the park. We give back. We, ask for a little scholarship money. And, for some kids, we found this scholarship fund that was started by 5 amazing HBCU grads, the Poussin Scholarship. And they give scholarships to students from the 5 boroughs that are attending HBCUs in the fall. And so we were like, great, well, ask our friends to donate. This will be something super small. And about a month into releasing SpringComing New York City is what it was called at the time, we had 1,000 RSVPs. And we were like, okay, this is more than something we can just kind of do in the backyard, right? We need more support. And so, that very first SpringComing, actually Revolt TV was our sponsor. They came through and they were like, this sounds like a really awesome idea, but that's really how it started. It was just an idea that George and I had to really bring the same type of socially influential, super active New York City transplant almost. And a lot of natives actually that went to HBCUs, just bring them all together for a time for us to fellowship. We have that common denominator of the HBCU experience, which I think goes a long way. And so that is how SpringComing started in 2015. It's crazy. We're in year 8. And to date have given away over $100,000 in scholarships.
That's amazing. George, talk to me about why it was important. Now we know how it came together after brunch, after church. I joke and say people go to FCBC just to do brunch.
Permission. You got to get the permission to go and have the community.
Right. But also, the church knows that too. The church knows that too.
Yeah, audience, that's little New York City baseball. There's a church, First Corinthians Baptist Church here in Harlem. That's super popular, incredible pastor I have a chance of knowing for a while. Does really great work. And it is one of the go-to churches here. And everybody knows when you go to church, you're going to somebody's brunch after. And so, George, just talk a little bit about the importance and why you recognize that, because HBCUs has been the topic of conversation right now in our society. It's about choice now, right? And we're asking ourselves in society. I went to PWI, Arts and Law with University of Michigan, but there's conversation now about PWI versus HBCU students. I've gotten DMs, George, where people have asked me, do I regret going to a PWI now and not an HBCU?
Oh my gosh.
And so now we're at this space now, right? Now people are asking to choose, HBCU as an athlete over a PWI institution as an athlete, right? But I felt like you and Lauren and your other colleagues associated with HBCU SpringComing were already doing this and putting HBCU at the forefront before it became this trending conversation of social construct. So talk to me about why you felt the need to center that. And what do you think SpringComing is moderating this portion of the social construct that we're having with HBCU discussions?
I love the room that you gave with that question, because the first thing to understand is that Black people are not monolithic. So neither are graduates from HBCUs, and therein neither is HBCU SpringComing. And the reason why I identify that is because half of my household belongs to a graduate from a PWI. 30% to 35% of our attendees are PWIs. And so when we start understanding and thinking about what the culture means in this space for many that are trying to abscond with the zeitgeist and make HBCU just mean Black, there are specific kind of, demographies in there, right? But we want to really make sure that the attention paid to HBCUs is also supporting them and not just using their iconography and their bands and their culture to promote something, but also to promote the educations that happen there. And I know there's so many choices that people make, particularly athletes, right? You go to where you think you can get the best education, the best exposure, the best competition as you move into hopefully your next level of athletic career, right? But what we want to do is we want to like hold the mirror up a little bit and remind our folks that you can actually go to an HBCU and be all of the things you could be everywhere else and even more, right? Us using our resources and our talents and supporting our culture there is our way, particularly with SpringComing, of reminding people to support those institutions that helped us become who we would become before we really knew who we were, right? This is family. This is going to a family reunion. And at a family reunion, yes, they're going to ask you to do certain things, but they're going to give you certain things. We're going to share stories. There's going to be a safety net there in which you can actually really sharpen each other. And so for us, in thinking about how the culture would understand what SpringComing even meant, as Lauren said, we know what homecoming is. We know what comes with that. I don't care what school you went to. If you're Black, you know what a homecoming is, right? At an HBCU. But SpringComing was a kind of niche for us that began in New York that in title made people understand, oh, wait a minute, this is homecoming in the spring. It's something people knew immediately. HBCU SpringComing. And so it is not necessarily a dog whistle, but it is an opportunity to kind of speak to a certain culture who knows that support that comes from that HBCU community is available outside of the schools that they went to. And that's why even moving into Birmingham was important, right? To know that you could actually leave your community, go get educated, and come back with those talents and support your community and go to any school of your choice, particularly one of the 107 HBCUs.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that dynamic. And Lauren, I want you to pick up the Birmingham piece. You started talking, and I think it's actually, no, I don't want you to pick up the Birmingham piece yet, Lauren. I want to talk to you about the distinction by not putting it in the fall, right? Because I feel like that was a choice. And so I need to understand why that choice was made, because, George mentioned homecomings. I know I have a Morehouse, what do y'all spell house on the Zoom right now. I know I have FAMU, but I think A&T has the greatest homecoming on earth.
I'm sorry. And they do too. And they do too.
I'm a set trip. I'm an honorary Aggie. I'm a set trip a little bit. You know what I mean? Aggie pride. Just for no reason, Lauren. I'm talking shit. Why did you? What was it with the choice to do spring versus fall? Because I feel like there was a connectivity.
It definitely was. So, I'm going to be honest with you as someone who is a lifelong advocate of HBCUs before it was cool, right? Before it was in the news, as George mentioned. We know what a fall schedule looks like. We know what a fall homecoming schedule looks like. We know that if your homie went to Howard and maybe you're trying to go catch his homecoming senior year, it might be on the same day, right? Okay. And so we did not want to crowd the fall with another HBCU-esque activity. We really wanted it to stand out, and thus through our relationship and thankfully longevity with the city of New York, we were actually the first festival to take place in the spring for New York City, which is a really big deal, right? Because late April in New York City, you might get a smooth high 70s, or you might get 50s. And so we've had to really curate our schedule according to that. So it, I think it still gives fall vibes. You might have a little sweatshirt weather. But for us, we wanted the festival to stand out, and we really wanted to give people what we thought they needed at that time. If you were already going to be going back to your campus in the fall, you may not need the fellowship, the camaraderie, the excitement of an HBCU SpringComing because you're going to get it already, right? But you may really need it in the spring after the winter chill has worn off and you're excited to be leaving your house because it was 24 inches of snow for the past month, right? We're trying to get people out so that they feel each other and they can see each other. And that's what it feels like. It feels like almost people coming out of hibernation in New York City to experience what HBCU SpringComing is.
Yeah, I like that because I was hoping like that was part of the dynamic, because for me, besides being logistics, besides that, for me, I was looking at it from perspective of, unity and not about a specific school, right?
Yep,
A
it's
lot of times we can all set trip, I set trip about my school, to the fall for big season. So we all braggadocious about our school. But what I loved is that you guys haven't put FAMU at the lead, you haven't put Morehouse at the lead, and you put the HBCUs at the lead. Lauren, talk to me a little bit about why that was important, to put the HBCU as the center, right, and not about school specific. So what are you driving home with that narrative?
Yeah, I think, I think when you attend an HBCU and really any school in which you were active, right? Even in PWI, if you were super active on campus, there's a natural network there, right? And so I think when George and I were building SpringComing, especially in those first few years, we were very deliberate in that network and reaching out to FAMU grads and reaching out to Spellhouse grads. And what we realized were a lot of the folks that are most active with SpringComing, for instance, A&T comes and shows out every single year for SpringComing, right? We really have been very deliberate in honestly making sure that we are pulling even vendors from other HBCUs. And making sure that even though we may be more familiar with the Spellhouse graduates and with the FAMU graduates, that we make sure that we, loop people in from Morgan, talk to people from North Carolina Central. How can we get you active? Xavier, Southern, they all have presence in New York, right? And so how are we getting these people just as excited about SpringComing? Because it's not about the individual schools that often get a lot of shine. Spellhouse has a whole, line with Ralph Lauren right now, right? But there are a lot of HBCUs out there. And so how are we able to shine as much of a light on them as we do the ones that are most familiar to young people in the Northeast, like your Howards and your Hamptons? There's, as George mentioned, 107 of them, right? And so making sure that no one school is at the forefront was really important to us, although we do get a lot of support from our alma maters, I will say that. But making sure that we include all HBCUs because the experience is similar. The discrimination that we feel often from other non-HBCU universities is also very similar. And so we stand together in that. And that was more important than any one school shining.
I want to pick that up in a second, Lauren, but George, I want to come to you because, Lauren teed up a few things that came out of that statement. And one was about making sure all HBCUs are recognized. And George, you and I talked about choice in the beginning of this, right? That students make. And when she was talking, I automatically was thinking about our frat brother, George, who was the president at Wiley College. And just recently their school got eliminated for those graduating seniors. Talk to us about that dynamic of choice when it comes within HBCUs and how we can put other HBCUs, more so at the forefront to get the attention, because it just seems like HBCU is very dominated by the AUC and by that North Carolina, DC, Florida contingency.
Yeah, no, so I mean, and again, I think that's also why we were so deliberate in calling it HBCU SpringComing. There's so much in that name that we hope allows any HBCU grad or potential attendee, enrollee to see promise for themselves there, right? The idea of even spring, particularly being a new growth, a birth kind of time, was something that wasn't lost on us either. In terms of the choice, far too often we have our athletes or our non-athletic students being told what they can and cannot do, right? They're evaluated by their communities, they're evaluated by government, they're evaluated by teachers even, and given paths that are assigned to them in a way that sort of obstructs or impedes their imagination. And one of the things I know that HBCUs do is that we really invest in the imagination of our attendees. I remember going to Morehouse and with all the boxes I checked, sitting down and waiting to sort of like stick my chest out. And Dean Darden said, well, how many of you were president of student council? And I was like, okay, y'all watch this. And I raised my hand. Everybody raised their hand, right?
Everybody.
How many of y'all were XYZ? It was like, oh, okay, this one's me. And everyone raised their hand. And you recognize that there are, at this institution, other ways that you're going to have to grow to learn who you are, to sort of stand out. And those choices were the ones that I think shaped who I ended up becoming. In the same way, I can think of a student whose options might be limited per what their teachers, their community has said to them, but being opened up to the fact that there are 107 places that would love to welcome you in, to bring your talents in, to build with you. And to make that available to students is honestly the greatest gift we can give. There are industries that would sort of look to dominate where you should be educated. I can think of Spike Lee, who showed up on his own at SpringComing in New York City because he heard about us from other attendees. But I can think about the fact that, Morehouse wasn't really a film school. It's, at the time. But had he not had the opportunity to be sharp in there and to learn some of the things and to deepen his cultural understanding of his own people, when he went to film school, he might not have taken that portion of his education and ultimately brought what he did to us, in the world. And so I think that the idea of choice is extremely important for young students who might not pursue education in ways that they feel comfortable, who might not pursue careers in ways that would change all of us if it weren't for HBCUs. It's just extremely important that it be amongst your options and it be seen as a viable option. Not just go here because you can't go someplace else. Not just go here because your mom and your dad went here. Not just go here because you watch the Different World reruns on YouTube before you went to sleep. Go here because we want you here, because we will help build something together. That's why HBCU SpringComing is important.
Well, then why talk? Okay, so now I love where you're going now. I love this. I went to Alabama for my first time 2 years ago, maybe 3 now, to interview Brian Stevenson for Just Mercy. And I had the chance to tour the memorial and the museum, interview him at the memorial. And I was just talking about being at Montgomery. And then I had a chance to interview the mayor of Montgomery. And it's fascinating to hear how he's reimagining the South. It's fascinating how he's reimagining Montgomery, and he's talking about choice, choosing businesses. I haven't been to Birmingham. This is where Birmingham we play. So why the choice of Birmingham, George, with the HBCU SpringComing?
Yeah, so it's so first of all, shout out to Montgomery, Steve Reed, obviously an HBCU grad as well. And that actually is the similar reason why Birmingham, right? Where we're dealing with a mayor and many people within his administration, including Cornell Wesley, who is the Director of Innovation and Economic Opportunity, also an HBCU grad, right? And then to be very specific, Alabama, and this might be new information for some of your listeners, but Alabama is the home to the most HBCUs, right?
I didn't know that.
It's crazy, right?
14.
14. And so to Lauren's point, even thinking about New York not being home to HBCUs, but having a lot of graduates from the area there, we wanted to show that community what it would mean to actually have them leave to go to HBCUs and come back and build within the community, because that's what we did, right? But in Birmingham, it was pretty interesting because the thought in a lot of areas, particularly in the South, is sometimes provincial, where you don't necessarily leave home. You kind of keep it right there, right? But our thought was that because of the partnership with those HBCU grads that were there, because of the proximity to other HBCUs that were there, and because of our relationship, potential though it was at the time, with the Birmingham Promise, which is an opportunity that Birmingham provides for their residents to go to institutions, colleges for free. We thought, well, this is an opportunity for us to expose HBCUs to those same students, right? And so the idea of being there, and to be very clear, a lot of the obstructions and obstacles that you face when building a festival, because this is a festival, and the bureaucracy and the red tape that goes along with it, sometimes it has to do with your partnership, right? Whether or not the city is making it easy for you, right? Or whether or not the city wants you there. And so in the interest of sharing with students that we want you at HBCUs, we wanted to be in a city that wanted us there, right? And so if I'm being honest, it was made a little bit easier because of some of, the relationships with Southern entities there, right? But specifically because the people of Birmingham so earnestly believe in the culture of their city, believe in the fact that they can compete with any city in the world. It matched with how we feel as HBCU grads. We so earnestly believe in our culture, so earnestly believe that we can compete or better the education of any school in the world. It was kind of a perfect partnership, and it worked out well.
So Lauren, George is making me think about something. Detroit, I'm from Lansing, Michigan, but Detroit has this thing called Homecoming, but they do it for a different reason. And it's to address these issues of brain trust, right? And how a lot of individuals grow up and born in Detroit they go get educated, no matter where, PWI, HBCU, and they never come back to Detroit, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of that brain trust gets lost, right?
Yes.
George is
Yes.
calling out HBCU mayors within within Alabama. He's calling out individuals who work in municipalities who attended, HBCUs. Is there something about this, Lauren, that you can help me unpack and moderate what you guys will hope? Obviously it's a festival, it's a fun, it's games, it's foundational work, it's philanthropic work, but ideology, right? Narrative shifting and changing, right? Is there something you're hoping to moderate within something similar to the brain trust to change the narratives around like HBCUs?
We definitely do. So there is, so when George and I talk about this being a festival, it is obviously more than a one-day event, right? And so we do anywhere between 7 and 9 events in 3 days. It feels very homecoming-ish because you're tired at the end. Honestly, listen, you've been kicking it all weekend. You've done a little service. You may have given a little scholarship money. You kicked it a whole lot, and so you're exhausted, right? But the goal of HBCU SpringComing is well beyond the fellowship, and we really highlight that in our kickoff event, which is called the Innovation Lab. It is a proprietary term that was founded by another HBCU grad, Joe Womack, from an organization called Amplify for Good. It's most probably easiest compared to a hackathon. And so the goal is to get a lot of HBCU grads in one room to solve a potential problem, either a problem that plagues HBCUs, but in Birmingham specifically, it is a challenge that plagues the city of Birmingham. And so we are bringing all these grads together, all of their amazing intellectual property, and almost having a hackathon around how can we solve for this issue and give back to the community of Birmingham. Number one, so that our relationship can be everlasting, right? Like we don't want to come to a new city and just leave it. That's not what we did in New York. That's not what we plan to do in Birmingham. And so taking their challenge or their issue and really putting time and brain power and manpower behind how can we solve for this was a really big component for us of SpringComing. We do the Innovation Lab every single year, but I think it's really important to note that in Birmingham, it is being done specifically in partnership with the city of Birmingham, because it's important for us to say, hey, you guys already have this intellectual property here. We just need to put them together in one room and see how we can solve for this as a full community. Because I think one thing that HBCU grads really take seriously is community, whether or not it's our local communities and where we're from, where we're living now, or maybe it's even our HBCU communities. What does that look like? And so we've been able to really take, some of the challenges as a city that Birmingham has been very open in disclosing. Shout out to Mayor Randall Woodfin, he's amazing. Shout out to Cornell Wesley again. But they've been able to say, we're having some challenges here. How can HBCU SpringComing help? And thanks to the construct of Joey's Innovation Lab, I think we're really going to do that, and it's going to be amazing.
That sounds fantastic. George, I can't talk to you guys for hours, but I think I would love to just to unpack. So I think, you guys have to talk about the SpringComing, but there's just a lot to unpack. A lot more regarding the idea and narrative shifting around HBCUs that gets to the narrative of choice. And for me, I think it's important that Black students understand the choice that they have in their secondary education. I believe that secondary education for Black people has been very binary, and I don't believe that HBCUs have been given the fair shot of equity when it comes to choice in choosing post-secondary education routes, no matter when it comes down to sports, no matter when it comes down to academics. You mentioned film within Spike Lee. I'm thinking about the Howard School of Arts that they have. I think the Chadwick Boseman now, a very specific School of Performing Arts. And so the equity of choice for me is something that needs to be more amplified. The give back component, George, for you guys is important. Talk to me about the dynamic. It's important that you guys as HBCU SpringComing, give back. You have the scholarship that you're giving, $1,000, 25 students. It's great. But George, if you can expand that to me just a little bit larger about the importance of donating, right, and supporting HBCUs around the country. I think the 170 that you mentioned.
Yeah. So it's funny. One of our official, unofficial sort of taglines for HBCU SpringComing is swag, surf, support. And that's how we think of it, right? Like Lauren said, we gonna kick it. Like when we all get together, we are going to kick it. But that's how this all began. We realized there was so much power, resource power in both our brains, our other resources, when we got together, that we could actually be leading that servant kind of quest, right? We could be stewards of that servanthood. For us, you know, the narrative has been pretty specific. If you look at what's been happening with some of the HBCU grads and even allies in the past couple of years, whether that was the class of 2000 and I think it was 21 or 20 at Morehouse, or whether that was Hampton, or whether that was the recent reaccreditation of Morris Brown, you start looking around and you realize that people recognize what a resource these communities are. And by communities, I mean what we refer to as the HBCU Diaspora. And you see that folks with money and resources and ability are starting to forgive debt for these grads because they recognize how big a deal it is to give back in that space, right? For us, being able to not only give back in the over $100,000 that we have, being able to align ourselves with the students from the Birmingham Promise, 25 students getting $1,000, as you said, is important. But also it was showing them that there are choices for your secondary education and your career paths. You know, my father always says that there are so many careers right now that our students will have that haven't even been created yet. And we recognize that because the way innovation and technology is sort of, you know, the trajectory that they're on. So if you think about that and combine it with how many people are giving opportunities to forgive student loan debt, particularly for these communities, there is a current shared recognition of what needs to happen at the next level of the ways in which we've been encumbered financially, right? The ways in which we haven't been able to pursue choice in secondary education, or the way that our athletes are thinking, well, I have to go to this school because nobody's going to see me at Jackson State. And then you have Deion Sanders going to be the coach at Jackson State, and the entire narrative shifts. We have that power. We are natural storytellers. We are also naturally the story. And so if we begin to write our own chapters in that way and start thinking about the ways in which we tell our story, we can bring attention and resources back that allow us to feel more comfortable in the return on that investment, that allow us to feel more comfortable in asking other people to send their kids our way, send your dollars our way, open up opportunities for internships, open up opportunities for exposure for these kids to actually figure out, not only for secondary levels of education, but while they are students, how do we start to harvest some of that talent and point them in the right direction? How do we create new curriculum and new majors and build new buildings and name them after our heroes so that we can see the potential there? And I think for us, HBCU SpringComing has always been about providing the opportunity for those to see what you could be if you went to an HBCU, if you gave back to an HBCU, and if your community and your family was that of an HBCU.
That was so beautifully said, George 2.0 Peters. Lauren Grant Grove, I'm going to allow you to end. What is one takeaway that you hope individuals will leave with after they swag, surf, and support you guys at the SpringComing?
Yes, I honestly, I would say two things, unfortunately, not one, but I think the first thing is that we need to continue this legacy that we've been so fortunate to benefit from. And that involves primarily with our dollars. I remember talking to a friend of a PWI grad, an Ivy League grad previously, and he told me that starting from their freshman year, they are ingrained that upon graduation, they need to be thinking about giving no less than $100,000 back to the university before they die. That is something that we don't talk about in the HBCU community, right? But it's very realistic for us. And so that is the first level of support, I would say. And then after you swag, surf, and support, it's also, when we talk about legacy, the kids that come after us. You know, one great thing that we've done in New York City and that we hope to continue is connecting these students that are attending the HBCUs in the fall with their alumni associations locally, right? So when they come back home, they have a network. If they need something or somebody on campus, there's someone for them to call on. You know, a vast part of the HBCU experience is the alumni experience. And so we want to make sure that in addition to giving our dollars to students who are currently there, we are also able to support them with our presence. And so I would say those are the two things that we hope everyone leaves with.
I love that. And folks, you can join them May 25th or 29th. It's free. For more information, go to HBCU SpringComing.com. That's HBCU SpringComing.com. Lauren Grant Grove, thank you so much for joining. It's so great to meet you. And George 2.0 Peters, brother, it is a pleasure. Please tell Mrs. Peters I said, what's up?
We'll be there. Calamari, ceviche, and a margarita on us. Let's do it.
I would love that. I hope you're cooking. Folks, he can cook. I watch him on Instagram. It is amazing.
I love it.
All right. Well, I love you guys. Be good and have fun. All right, everybody. Peace.